Hi, friends. Welcome to the Pain-Free Birth Podcast. I'm your host, Karen Welton, a certified doula, childbirth educator, and mother of three. In this space, we'll hear positive, supernatural, and yes, even pain-free birth stories from women just like you. We'll explore the deeply spiritual side of childbirth and how God designed women's bodies brilliantly for birth. Let's get started. Welcome back, ladies. Today, I have the honor of interviewing Rachel Jones, who, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
This is a different kind of birth story than one I typically share, but it's no less profound, miraculous, supernatural of a birth. I will give a warning, a little trigger warning here for any moms who are sensitive to preterm birth, NICU stays, loss. This may be something that is triggering for you, but today we're going to be hearing about Rachel's birth of her daughter Abby, who was born at 26 weeks, and some of the incredible, miraculous testimony of what God did through this experience. And I feel like it's so important to share not just the pain-free birth stories and the birth stories that go how we planned them to go, but also the ones that don't go according to plan, and what happens and how prayer can change things, and we can still walk through that, and God can still empower us in incredible ways. And Rachel's testimony is just such a beautiful example of that. I featured her and asked my community on pain-free birth on Instagram to pray for her. So if you were following me back in 2021, which is when you gave birth, Rachel, you probably remember this. And I posted about it not too long ago, again, just as like a little update recap. Everybody prayed from all around the world. It was so moving.
There were people praying from places I'd never even heard of before. I remember sitting in the hospital telling my husband, Dylan, look at all these people that they don't even know us, but Karen shared our story. I was like, wow, amazing.
I
But
know.
I'm just so excited to be here and be able to share with you guys, because our story would not be what it is without you, Karen, and all the content that you have shared that helped empower me during this birth, and then the community behind us as well. Because as I'm sure every mom listening knows, it really does take a village. And that doesn't just start once your baby is born. It's during pregnancy, you need your people. It's during birth, you need your people. And that's one of the most beautiful things that I've found about the Instagram community. Just feeling that support and that prayer from everybody was game changing.
Yeah, I know. For whatever reason, God just put you on my heart. And I remember hearing your story and seeing this and saying, I felt like I had to do something. It felt a bit more intimate, a bit more family community then. Not that it's not now, It's a bigger family now, but it was really like a call to action that I felt like we would actually have an impact, and knowing like prayer changes things. Like, so God just put on my heart to share. And I didn't even expect it to kind of snowball into what it was. I think I heard about it before you had delivered, when you were in labor at 25 weeks. And let's just kind of back up and share the story. So at the point you were pregnant with Abby in 2021, you were following me. I think you said you were planning to take my course, but never actually got a chance to take it.
It was supposed to happen in my third trimester, but then I never got to my third trimester.
You never had a third trimester. Oh my goodness. Amazing, right? So tell us like the story, what happened when you realized at 25 weeks, oh my goodness, am I in labor? Like, what was that like for you?
Well, now looking back on it, I can see, oh, I was in early labor for days that whole week. I just didn't even have that on my radar because I was 25 weeks pregnant. Going into labor was the last thing on my mind.
Sure.
And in my head, I was kind of thinking, this is my fourth pregnancy in 4 years. I've had my kids very close together. I've been able to breastfeed all of them. My body's probably just tired, and pregnancy is hard when you're running around after two young toddlers. And my back just kept hurting. And I was like, man, okay, I guess this is just going to be a rough pregnancy. And then I had an appointment with my midwife on Wednesday, which is a whole crazy story in itself, because my husband and I were both very afraid of home birth. We were like, very cool, but like some people are interested in traveling to space, cool for them. Not for me, not interested. that's kind of how we felt about home birth. It's like super cool, love that for people, but it's just not for us. I'm too scared. But then when I was pregnant with Abby, we both came to each other, having thought about this separately, and we're like, I think we should do a home birth, which was very out of left field. That was not something we were expecting to do at all. But we were like, okay, well, God changed both of our hearts to be desiring a home birth. That clearly is for a reason. So jumped in and found, I think you follow them as well, Beautiful One Midwifery. They're based out
Yeah.
of San Marcos, Kelly and Tiffany.
Yes, I love them.
Phenomenal, phenomenal. Oh, they're just so near and dear to my heart. But
They're
so
amazing.
jumped in with them, had my first appointment with them, and it was great. So excited. Everything was great at the appointment. And the following day, I had an appointment with my regular OB as well. We did blood work, we had an ultrasound, all your usual stuff. Everything looked great. And then the next day, that Friday, we were having a family dinner. And that whole dinner, I was like, these Braxton Hicks are intense. I did not expect it to be like this. And so then after our family left, I was kind of like, maybe I'll just like get a good night's sleep and that'll help things calm down a little bit. Hardly slept that night. Woke up in the morning and Dylan was like, are you sure everything is okay right now? And I said, I don't know. And I was kind of freaking out because we had had that previous loss. And I was afraid of that happening again because I hadn't felt what my body was feeling at this point. And so he said, okay, let me take the kids outside. You rest. He got me some water, got my feet propped up. And then what I thought were Braxton Hicks started getting way more intense and also pretty high pain tolerance. And Dylan was like, Rachel, these are not Braxton Hicks contractions. I've seen you give birth twice now. This is contractions.
Hmm.
And I was kind of in denial about it a little bit, I think, just because that made no sense to me. I was 25 weeks pregnant at this point. Why would that be happening? So I was like, okay, let me try all the things that make them stop. None of the things worked. And so I went to go get in the shower because I was like, okay, this is like the last trick I have up my sleeve to be able to see if these will stop. And when I went to undress, my mucus plug had came out. But my immediate thought was, I'm miscarrying again. And I was thinking, there's no way this could be happening. Like, will this baby be okay? What do I do? We're supposed to have her at home. So I called Kelly and Tiffany and I was like, this is what's going on. What do I do? And they were so calm, but they were like, go into the hospital, go get checked out. Let's just see where things are at and keep us posted and let us know anything we can do to help. I was like, okay. So we just took a deep breath. Dylan packed the kids in the car, got me in the car, and we started driving to the hospital. And we pull up to the emergency room. And the woman that came out of the emergency room to take me in goes, oh, he can't come in here. My husband. And I was like, excuse me? And it's because of their COVID rules. This was California in early 2021. And they told me he wasn't going to be able to come in that way with me, that he would have to go get checked through this other entrance and take a temperature and all that. And I remember looking at the lady and said, if my husband is not in that room when I get up there, I'm throwing a fit. Because I was like, I'm not doing this by myself. Like, no, he will be in that room with me and he will be by my side through this whole thing. And she was like, okay, yeah, we'll make sure he's there.
Yeah, I love you.
That was my first moment of like, nope, this is happening how I want it to
Yes.
happen, and he will be in that room.
Yes, yes.
So he was there. They got him up there real quick. He was there when I got to the room.
Amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah, so that was
Like
great.
anyone who birthed during COVID, especially in California, holy cow, like major props to you and for
Sure.
advocating for yourself like that. So incredible. What happened next? Like, obviously, you're probably freaking out. Were the doctors freaking out? Like, what did they
Yeah,
do?
there was a lot of people in the room, and they hooked me up right away. The first thing they went for was checking if there was a heartbeat, which there was, and that was the very first thing we saw. And I was like, okay, that's what I needed to see. Then they
Yeah.
checked my fluid levels. They were monitoring my contractions because those were still happening about 3 minutes apart. And my fluid levels were fine. My water hadn't broken yet. Everything looking at the ultrasound looked great. And so they're like, okay, we're going to bring the doctor in. We're going to talk about some options here. And they put me in the bed. What's it called? That really long word with a T, trans something berg. What's that called when they put you like upside down? Your feet are raised and your head
Uh,
is down.
like an inverse,
Yeah.
a forward leaning like inversion or
Well,
some
I
kind of
was
inversion.
backwards. So my
You're
head was down towards the ground and my feet
okay.
were up towards the ceiling at like a 45-degree angle
Yeah. Yeah. So
because
you,
they
yeah,
were,
your head was down and your feet were up. That's interesting. They did that too. That's like what they used to do back in the day before hospitals.
yeah, they said gravity. That's all
Yeah.
we're fighting against right now is gravity because she's so small at this point that if things were to progress even faster, then gravity could play a factor in that. So
Wow.
upside down I went. Which was a very odd feeling because all the blood is rushing to my head, of course, which is just not a good feeling in general. Plus, feeling so overwhelmed about everything that was going on. But even in that moment, once I saw that her heartbeat was there, I was like, okay, Dylan is here. There's a heartbeat. Something's going to happen. And all we can do is go through each moment by moment and figure out what to do because I had no idea. I'd never known anybody well enough that had a premature baby to know what happened when you went through a premature birth like this, especially because there was no outstanding circumstance like preeclampsia or anything like that. I was just spontaneously in labor. And so then they started me on an IV with fluids and a couple other medications that I can't remember the name of that was supposed to slow down my contractions.
Yeah.
And then they started me on magnesium. So that way, if the baby was born, that would hopefully deter a brain bleed from happening. And that was the most horrific thing I've ever been given. They told me before they gave it to me, the loading dose is always really, really hard to handle. Your whole body's going to get hot. It'll probably make you feel lightheaded, and it just isn't a good feeling. They were not kidding. I felt like my body was lit on fire. It was
Wow.
so hot everywhere and I started throwing up and I got really tired all of a sudden. But I was like, well, if this
Wow.
is going to help our baby not have a brain bleed, then do whatever you want to me. I don't care. But yeah, that was quite the experience. And
Wow.
then the doctor comes in and it happened to be the OB that had delivered my son. And
Wow.
she didn't remember me, of course, because she delivers a ton of babies, but I remembered her and I was like, oh, cool, like a familiar face.
Yeah.
And so she's doing the ultrasound to check on how Abby's doing. And she goes, oh my, and pulls out her cell phone and takes a picture. And I was like, Jillian, what do you mean, oh my? Abby had stuck her foot out of my cervix, just poking it on out.
No.
Yeah. I was like,
Did
can you put
you
it back?
did you know
Like,
you were dilated? Like how,
no, I assumed that I was because
what?
at this point I'd been having
Yeah.
contractions for a couple hours. So I assumed that I was,
But your
but
water hadn't broken yet. And she
no.
stuck her foot out your cervix. And
Yeah,
the doctor could see this on the ultrasound.
she was like, I've never seen this before. And I was like, that's great. Can you like put her back in?
Put it, can
Like,
you put her back in? Yeah.
yeah, like how is this gravity
What?
thing not working out? Um,
It could have been more
so
of her body without the gravity.
right? Like what should she just slip and slide out? Like,
Yeah, it's because right, preemies are a whole different situation. Like they're you don't need to be 10 centimeters dilated to have a preemie. They're much
no,
smaller. So what
right.
did they do?
So then their concern was, okay, she's breached. So if we might have to do an emergency C-section, but we want to keep her in. They wanted to keep me in the hospital until I was at my due date, which was a very scary thought to me
Until
because
your due date. That's like
that was 4 months
15 weeks.
away.
Yeah, four
Yeah,
months.
I said no. I said that's not going to happen because at this point, with all those medications, my contractions were still 10 minutes apart. And at that point, those medications should have like stopped my contractions completely.
Yeah. So
So
were they giving you options? Were they telling you like, here's what we're gonna do? Like, but they, I'm assuming they were planning to like keep you. They wanted to keep you in the hospital and try to stop the labor. But it's funny to me that they were so concerned about her being breached because the research on breech babies that are preemies are actually very successful. Like that as preemies
yeah,
in a breech presentation, the risks of head entrapment and the things that they're concerned about are so low because they're so small. They just kind of tend to slip out.
that's kind of what I thought too. I was like, after the fact, I was thinking about it more and I was like, who really cares what direction she would have came out? She's so small. I think it's
So
funny too how hospitals are so intensely against breech births, but I
yeah,
mean, even on your page, we've seen so many
so many.
successful
Yep.
breech births that if you're handling birth in a physiological way, a breech position isn't the end of the world.
Right. It's not. And it's just something they're not used to seeing. I mean, and
Yeah,
so you've got a situation where the leg is hanging out. Not only are you preemie, but you're breech, which scares them equally. They shouldn't have been scared about the breech, but obviously the
yeah,
preemie is a major concern, and we have to like keep that. And the goal is to keep the baby in as long as possible because 25 weeks is super early, and
yeah.
I'm sure the risks or rates of survival are not that great at that
No,
stage. And were they telling you all that? Like, how were you handling all of this?
not at that point. So after that whole incident with her foot happened, they were coming in and checking me like every 10 minutes or so. And so then they came back in and she had turned herself around after that. Just wanted to take a little peek and then take a little flip around. With knowing her personality now, I'm like, that makes sense. That, yeah, that's
I'm just gonna
absolutely
say
something
hi
Abby
with
would do.
my foot and then
Yeah.
flip over.
Oh, yeah. We always joke that she's like aggressively shy because she's very shy with people she doesn't know. But like, you'll say hi to her and she'll go, no, and then just turn away.
That's what
So,
she did to that doctor. She stuck her foot out, said
yeah,
no, and then turned around.
exactly.
No, I don't like you. I'm going the other
Nope.
way.
Yeah, this whole premature situation makes so much sense with her personality. Like
Oh my goodness.
she would be the one.
So
So once
crazy.
she turned around, they're like, "All right, let's get her to the other hospital right now." And so
Okay.
then they loaded me up into a gurney, and I was kind of freaking out because Dylan was going to have to drive separately, of course.
Yeah.
And
And this is all still the
I,
first day.
yeah. And then we get into the ambulance, and as we start driving, the older one is in the back with me, and he said, "How far along are you?" And I said, 25 weeks. And he said, "My son was born at 26 weeks." And I just jaw dropped. But
What?
that's
This
not
was
a coincidence. That's God gifting
Yeah,
us that
God sent that
EMT.
man. So he was your attendant, one of the medics in the ambulance,
Yeah, he was the one that was back in the back part with me when they were transporting me.
and he had a
When
son born at 26 weeks.
Yeah,
Wow.
and his son was born we were the same age, so his son at that point had been born 27 years ago, which NICUs 27 years ago look nothing like they look now. That's a far scarier circumstance than what I was
Yeah.
going through,
Wow.
and
And so what did that do for you?
it was so relieving because Dylan, my husband, is so helpful during labor and delivery that I care more about where he's comfortable than myself because he makes me feel so comfortable. And so having been pulled away from him into the ambulance really freaked me out. Especially, I didn't know if I was going to all of a sudden go back into those quick contractions again, being unhooked from all the continuous medications they had me on to slow those contractions down.
Yeah, and who knows how your body would have responded in that
And it was an hour
situation.
drive. So
Yeah.
I was just feeling very uneasy.
Yeah.
And being
Oh,
able to have that conversation really took my mind off of one, the contractions, two, all the what ifs, and just knowing that okay, this happens. And look at God gave us this EMT. Like, there's no way this guy just happened to be the one that came and got me.
yeah, and at the
No,
same age, at the same gestation, he
yeah,
happened to be with you, like, that is a godsend. Like, God's like,
absolutely.
"It's okay, I got this."
And so it was really nice. He was just helping me feel more comfortable. And then we got to the hospital. They took me up. Dylan was already there. They got me all settled, met with the new doctor, and they loaded me up on all the medications again, and again had that loading dose of magnesium.
Hmm,
At this point, right when we got to the hospital, my water broke. So then I'm kind of starting to freak out a little bit more. And I'm thinking they're going to make me deliver this baby because they're going to panic that my water broke. And we know how a lot of hospitals deal with that. But I was hoping to at least make it 2 more days because they had those shots that help the lungs develop more, but they have to be given within a 48-hour period. So I had one of them at the first hospital, but we needed to wait until the next day to get the second one.
yeah.
And that, for some reason, I felt a lot more confident about how she would handle life outside the womb if I had both of those shots.
Yeah.
So I was
It's
hoping to at
amazing
least just
some
make
of
it
the
through.
technology and the medications and things we can do now to help these
Oh,
babies that we
yeah.
didn't have, 20, 30 years ago. And this is
Oh,
one of those situations that I'm so grateful that we have the medical care available to us today
absolutely.
that even many other countries don't have.
No,
They just
like,
don't have the survival rates we have for preterm birth. And in these true
they don't.
emergencies, it's like, thank God we can help these
Mhm.
babies' lungs grow before they're even
Yeah.
born and give them a fighting chance. So
Yeah.
it's amazing.
That was the moment when they came in and started talking to us about those survivability outcomes.
Mm.
And that was one of the probably worst moments for me, anyways. My water is just broken and I'm trying to sit up and I can't. So Dylan's holding me up. He's literally holding my head up. I tried to lift my arm to get a drink of water and I couldn't. I'm throwing up. Every time I throw up, more amniotic fluid comes out. And they bring in the NICU team, the NICU nurse, the OB that was on. There's so many people in there, and I was so out of it from everything that was going on. I was like, why are we doing this right now? I'm throwing up, and you're talking to me about the survivability outcomes of my baby. They were talking about that she will most likely be gray. She's not going to be making any noise. We're going to have to intubate her right away. We might have to perform CPR, and all of that is going to have to happen in the room right next to you. So you need to prepare for that. So I'm throwing up and
Mm.
can't even open my eyes. My husband's holding my head, and I'm just like,
That's like the worst
why?
timing ever.
Yeah, but that's the moment when I think all the doctors thought this woman is insane because I was completely calm. Because once I got to the hospital and I laid in that bed, I knew that God told me this is going to be really hard, but she's going to be okay. So even though I had all those doctors
Wow.
in there, all of that was going on, I just knew I don't know what exactly that means. I don't know if she's going to be born in 5 minutes or in 5 days. But God said it's going to be hard, but she's going to be okay. So I'm not worried about this anymore. My only job is to birth this baby. That's
Wow.
all I can do. And that's where so much of your content really came into play for me was being able to actually say, this is what's going to happen. This is not what's going to happen because everybody had an opinion about what medication I should be on, how long I should be on it. Do this, don't do this. This is how we're going to keep you in here. And
Wow.
they didn't let me eat, which
Oh,
made me even more tired. Like, I am already laboring. I am so hungry, but they were worried they'd have to do an emergency C-section. I'm worried that I'm not going to make it through labor because I don't have anything in my system at this point. It's been so long.
and what are they
Eh,
expecting? Like, are they going to starve you for 5 days? Like,
right? Like,
these
what
things,
was my limit?
it makes like starving a woman in labor is probably going to send her into preterm labor or send her body into shock or cause a cesarean more than the risks of aspirating during that cesarean. Like,
I
sorry.
can't even count how many of your posts that I have saved that are like labor snacks, drinks to have during labor, what to have before, what to have afterwards to replenish your body. Like, what? Why? That was frustrating. And one of the nurses, he was so sweet. And again, this is where I think they all thought I was insane. I was so calm through all of this because I knew what the Lord had told me. And at our
Mm,
Bible study that previous week, we had been studying Hannah in First Samuel, and it just stuck out to me so vividly. Her calm and confident faith in an absolutely chaotic situation where she's been praying for this child and we read that God closed her womb, which from the outside can seem kind of confusing. Like, why would God do that to her when he also placed the desire in her heart to be a mother? But then we see that his timing of that child was so vital to what his story was going to be so that he could be raised up by that priest. And that was his story and how God intended to use this boy. And when we
wow.
read that story, that calm but confident faith that Hannah had stood out to me so much. And I know that was the Lord giving us that lesson so that I could hold on to that in my own circumstance of this incredibly chaotic situation where logic would say panic, but The Lord told me this is going to be hard, but it's going to be okay. So remembering, okay, we've seen the fruit of what it looks like to have that calm and confident faith. I want to embody that right now. So I'm going to do that spiritually while I physically also am able to say, this is what my body needs. This is what my baby needs. This is what we're going to do.
Wow.
Now, the nurses, some of them were believers and some of them were not. And at this point, I'm like, I can talk to you about Jesus all day long because you can't leave me alone and you can't get away from it. So this is a grand old opportunity for me. What are you gonna do? Be mean to a lady having a premature baby? No. So
Yeah, what did you say?
I was just telling them everything. I was telling them about the Bible study that we had and why I was able to feel confident and that God told me this is going to be hard, but she's going to be okay. And meanwhile, they're thinking all the medical statistics of like,
Yeah,
okay, she's probably just in denial. This is probably just something she's scared, but she's trying to lean on this to feel better. No,
right.
I just could be confident because, like we see when Hannah names Samuel Samuel, it's because God told her that he was going to give her a son. And so she knew he's faithful to do what he says. So I was being as Hannah as I possibly could.
Oh my gosh,
and
that is so beautiful. And then
and
the fact that you're even witnessing to your nurses about it and that your faith is like bubbling over, like here's what God told me. And they're probably thinking, oh well, she doesn't know how
she's
serious this
nuts.
is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is the way their training in medical school is so pragmatic. It's like black
Yeah.
and white numbers, stats, percentage and risk factor. And there's no room for faith in that. So I
No.
love that you were able to find that peace and stand on that faith, and not only that you could maintain that peace but that you were sharing it with the nurses around
Yeah.
you. It's beautiful. And so what happened, like how long were you pregnant with her?
5 days go by and I am having contractions 10 minutes apart for 5 days. And I had barely slept the days before that. And it was a new OB that came onto the rotation that day. And she said, I know this seems kind of strange, but I suggest you get an epidural so you can sleep because clearly this baby is coming. What do you want to do? And I was like, where'd you come from? What do I want to do? Like,
The
I
first
was
person to
not
ask me that in 5 days.
yeah, I was
You get a
not
gold star.
expecting that at all. And she said to me, she goes, you know your body than the rest of us. You don't know what your body's going to do. I'm sure you can tell what your body is feeling and what your body wants to do right now with this birth. This isn't your first rodeo. So you tell me. And I was like,
Wow.
give this lady a raise. Like, this is
Yeah,
amazing.
and get me a hamburger, that's what my body
Yeah,
wants.
exactly. I need in and out right now. Um, So I said, I'm gonna have this baby. And I know if you take me off these medications, I will have this baby today. And quite frankly, I want to because I am so tired. I can't do this any longer, physically or emotionally. She's not gonna stay in there for 4 months. We've had the 2 shots. I think this is as good as it's gonna get. I feel confident in her being born. Dylan's on board with it. I want to do. And she said, okay, how do you feel about taking a nap first? And I said, excellent. I'd love
That's
a
a
nap.
great idea. That is a
Yeah.
smart doctor.
Yeah.
Praise the Lord,
So,
because oh my
right?
gosh, that makes a huge difference to be
It
able
really
to
does.
go into labor well rested versus completely depleted and having not slept
Mhm.
or eaten in 5 days. Like that's a setup for an emergency cesarean and a crash
Right.
for mom
Yeah.
and baby. And they don't think about that. They don't think about the
No.
logical like consequences of these policies. So
No.
wow, that makes me so happy that she
I
said
was
that.
so grateful that she was there. So I got
So
the epidural so that I could take a nap. And I took, I
yep.
think it was like a 4 hour nap and it was glorious.
That is glorious.
And
And
then,
I always tell women like that is an excellent use of pain
yeah.
medication. If you
Oh,
are
yeah.
so depleted and exhausted from labor that your
Mhm.
body doesn't have the strength to push and you're
Yeah.
stalling and labor's not going anywhere, or like in your case where you're like, I'm about to go into labor, I know we're going to deliver, I
Yeah.
need my strength.
Right.
Epidurals, fantastic, because sometimes you need sleep more than you need
Yes.
to have an unmedicated birth, or that
Right.
epidural will save you from having a cesarean because you got your
Hmm.
strength back because you could actually sleep and rest.
Yes.
So So
And I
smart.
was hesitant about it at first because I got an epidural with my firstborn, and that was the epidural experience was fine, but I didn't know anything about birth at that time. I was 22 years old. I was the first
Sure.
one of my friends to have a baby. I hadn't even really looked into anything about birth. I thought, well, the doctor will tell me what to do because they're supposed to look out for me. Like that's their job. Why would anything else happen? Oh my
That's
God.
how so many women enter their first
Yeah.
birth and labor. And then you get the wake up call like, oh, my doctor's not even in the room for 80% of the time.
Yeah. So with
Forever.
my firstborn, I was dilated to 10. So she said, start pushing. So I did, but I didn't feel the need to push. I ended up pushing for 3 hours and having
Yep.
a fourth-degree tear because my body wasn't ready.
Which, for those who
And
don't know, a fourth degree tear is the worst kind of tear. And that's where it goes from your perineum all the way to your anus through all those layers of muscle. And it's extremely painful and difficult to recover from. And you only really get those from forced pushing.
yeah, it was horrible. So then I felt like, then fast forward to my second birth, that one happened very quickly. And so I hadn't ever felt what water breaking felt like until my
Mm.
birth with Thomas. And I'm sitting there and I look up and I look at my mom and I go, Mom, he just punched me in my butthole. How did he do that? And then all of the amniotic fluid comes out and I go, oh, it was my water breaking. He didn't punch me in my butthole. It's fine. It didn't even smell right. And so then I tell the nurse, I was like, my water broke and I feel like I need a push. And she's like, no, 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 it'll be like an hour or so probably. And I said, okay, well, I'm gonna start pushing. You can come back in an hour if you want. Because I felt like I was ready to push. And I was like, I'm not making that mistake again. So I
Okay.
feel like I was slowly working my way up to being able to be a confident birther. So then by the time we're here with Abby, when I finally have this OB that's like, what is this going to look like? How do you want it to look?
Yeah.
And I've been looking at your content, I've been reading your posts, I've been mentally preparing for this empowered birth where I can say what's going to happen, which I also knew I needed if I was going to do a home birth. Which now looking back on it, I think that's why God changed mine and Dylan's hearts on a home birth, is because I needed to be able to have that mindset of we can do this on our own. I was
Mm.
made to do this. I can have these tools of how to approach this birth physiologically in a healthy, confident, empowered way. And I needed that mindset to be able to do this with Abby, even though it wasn't going to be a home birth setting. But because he shifted our hearts to be ready to have that kind of birth, I think that's why in those moments I could say, okay, yeah, I'm going to take a nap on this epidural. Woke up, took out the epidural, took off as many as the IVs as she could. Said, so how do you want to lay? Are you comfortable laying? Do you want to stand? Do you feel strong enough to stand? What do you want to do? In my head, I had been wanting to be either like on my knees or standing up, just something a little bit more natural of a birthing position, but I just didn't have the strength at that point.
Yeah.
So she said, how about we roll you over on your side and I will hold your leg up for you. You don't even have to use your muscles. So this amazing woman, I'm laying on my side and she's just holding my leg up for me. So I didn't even have to do it. And I'm having these contractions now that all the medications are gone. Now they're about a minute apart. And I would have a contraction and then I would just lay there and like half fall asleep, half pass out, it felt like, because it was just taking everything out of me. And then I felt that moment where I was like, okay, I know this is the one where she's coming. And so I push, out she comes, and she is, as they had told me, they were thinking she was going to be gray, not moving, not crying, need to be intubated, and possibly CPR right away. She was bright pink, screaming her head off, like as
But,
loud as my full term children. And they were like silent,
oh my
jaw dropped.
gosh.
It was amazing. And so they pull her out, and because my placenta was like, I'm not leaving yet. Like I'm this, we're in here. Because she didn't come out super far because so much of my umbilical cord was still far up in my belly. You can hold her for a second. She's breathing. And so I reached down and she grabbed my arm so tight. And I will never forget that feeling of how tight Abby grabbed my arm. And it's so funny because it's the way that she grabs me now. If she's like hurt or scared, that like just fling to mommies that they
Wow.
do.
Yeah.
That's what she did in that moment. And I was just jaw dropped that I knew God had told me that she was going to be okay. I had just all of these amazing people around praying for us. I knew that there was people all around praying for us, thanks to you, thanks to our friends, our family, but still just seeing that miracle happen and actually tangibly holding a miracle, that's an indescribable
And the fact
moment.
that they let you even hold her at
Yeah.
26 weeks, she was born, right? On the day.
Yeah.
26-week-old baby. I have that is unheard of. Like every other story I've ever heard, they cut that cord and they whisk that baby to the NICU like stat.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
if they don't get him on the machines, that baby's gonna die, which we know isn't usually true,
Right.
but it they are usually critical condition. The
Yeah,
fact that
yeah.
they recognize, oh, she's breathing, she's stable,
Mhm.
we don't have to take her away from mom, and they let you
Mhm.
hold her. Holy
Yeah.
cow, I bet I would not be at all surprised if we get to heaven and we're like, yeah, that actually gave your baby the strength and the psychological piece to like know I'm safe and mom's here. Because
Yeah.
I think my personal opinion is one of the reasons NICU babies struggle so much outside of just the fact of being born early is the
Mhm.
abandonment and the fact
Yeah.
that they don't know where mom is and they're going into
Mhm.
psychological shock because they're not
Yeah.
connected and getting that skin to skin. And you
Absolutely.
got that, she got that from
Mhm.
like minute one. Did
Yeah.
they cut her cord right away?
Dylan got to cut it still. They would have let it stay attached longer, but my placenta was still like, I guess, I don't know if they could feel or what, I don't know, but they could just tell like it was not making its way out just yet. So Dylan actually cut the cord,
How long did they
and
wait, or did he wait?
it wasn't very long. I think it was like maybe a minute, which
Even
really
a
isn't, but
even a
in,
minute is honestly better than normal in that situation.
and I feel like in NICU time,
Yeah,
that's long, or preemie time,
that's very long.
that's
The fact
long.
I'm shocked. I never heard all the details. That I'm shocked that you got to hold a 26-week-old baby and that
Yeah.
they let your husband cut the cord after at least a minute. Like that's unheard of.
Yeah, they were absolutely shocked, and she didn't need to be intubated. She did need to be put on oxygen, but she didn't need to be intubated. There was no CPR, there was no resuscitation. So they had her in the little warmer with the whole NICU team right there. And then Dylan was able to go with her to the NICU right away. And then they worked with me on getting my placenta and everything out. And it was so interesting because they thought that my placenta would give us some kind of clue as to why I went into labor early, because nothing else was giving us any indication of what caused it. There was nothing wrong per
Yeah.
se with anything. And my placenta comes out and there were some blood clots on it, but they were sticky. So they're like, well, this is from, it did rupture partially during birth, but that makes sense because your body wasn't really ready to go into a birth.
Yeah.
But because they could pull them off, they knew it hadn't ruptured before, which could have caused a preterm birth. And it was only on half of the placenta. So they said, really, it must have happened pretty soon.
So why do you think you went into labor early?
I have no idea. I truly have no idea. I think maybe some of it could just be we live in a broken world, and sometimes bad or hard things that aren't supposed to happen, but that doesn't take away from what God can do in those moments, because clearly we can see that He was present through that
Yeah.
whole experience. And that experience of birthing her and then being in the NICU for 3 months afterwards absolutely changed me as a person. And it's even convicting to talk about it now because there were so many moments that while I was there in the hospital or while we were in the NICU that I would tell myself, I will never forget this. I will never let this be any less prevalent or heavy on my heart, to be so grateful to the Lord and to just live every single moment of both my life and me as a mom exactly how He wants me to do it. And I have failed countless times since then. It's just, it's so convicting to share these things because it brings me back to all those moments of feeling the Lord's presence and feeling His call on my motherhood and who I am as a woman and how He changed me and used all of these circumstances to pull me towards that person that He created me to be and wants me to be for my family, and how easily I can let outside circumstances make me dig my heels in the sand or forget any of those things.
What kind of things did God do in the NICU that you want to remember?
All of her nurses were absolutely shocked at how her birth went, how she was doing. She scored a 3 on her APGAR test, which is a terrible score for a full term baby. But for a NICU baby, usually they don't even get a 1. But
Wow.
she got a 3, which is like unheard of. And overall, the way that she responded to all of their treatments, the way that she responded to nursing, again, they all thought I was crazy because I told them I'm not bringing her home on a fortifier. I understand that she needs vitamins in the beginning. I know she needs some of those things now, but there came a point where she was spitting up so much and it was orange. And I told the nutritionist, she doesn't need that stuff anymore. I think she did for a while, but now her body is clearly rejecting it. And they're like, well, that's just because she has that's so common with preemies. And her feeding tube was all the way down into her intestines because she did have really bad reflux. But anytime they move, then that tube kind of irritates a little bit, which can make it worse. And so I was like, no, I don't think she needs these anymore. Let's just try it for 3 days. If she loses weight, I was wrong. We'll put her back on them. She was fine. She gained weight. And they were
Wow.
like, just so hesitant to listen to anything that I have to say.
Yeah, or to break protocol. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh, I am so impressed. Like, it's so hard to negotiate those kinds of things in the NICU because they have their
it's
way of doing
intimidating.
things. It's intimidating. Yeah, you're not a, maternal fetal specialist and
Nope.
NICU doctor. Like, these guys
Yeah.
have some big degrees behind their names, but a mother's intuition
Hmm.
trumps all of that. And you knew your
Yeah.
baby and you knew she doesn't need this junk anymore. She's throwing it up. I've heard from
And
other
it's,
NICU parents, like, they do the babies are throwing up, first of all, because they're also overfeeding them. Like, they're giving them many more ounces than their tiny little tummies can take. Then they're throwing up. And then they're like, well, we'll give them like oatmeal. We'll add like oats to the form, which is
yeah, that's a no
they
for
very
me.
they have no way to digest that, which causes like allergic react, like so many other problems. And these parents have to fight like tooth and
Yeah.
nail just to get like to not have all of these like crazy interventions because the focus is
Hmm.
so much on like how many ounces and pounds are they
Yeah.
gaining, and it's
Yes.
all on the external weight and not on the
Hmm.
actual internal health and digestion and long-term health of that baby.
Right.
So
And
I'm
there's,
so shocked that you advocated for it, that you felt confident to do that.
yes, I'm
You
so,
told
so
them what was
grateful.
going to happen. You're like, here, this
Right.
is what we're going to do. And if, you know
Yeah.
what, in 3 days, if she loses half an ounce or whatever, like, I was wrong. Okay.
Yeah, I can be wrong. I wanted
But
to be
you were right.
reasonable.
And they actually
I know.
listened.
Yeah, and there's so many studies about the breast milk from a mom who delivers a premature baby is higher in fat, it's higher in calories,
Yes.
almost as
So
if God designed the
superior.
whole system.
Yes.
Weird.
It's superior to everything they could give that baby, all the
Mhm.
high calorie formula feeds in the hospital, which they
Oh,
push a lot, which is
mhm.
also part of that is because the formula companies design a lot of the protocol in the NICU rooms. And I don't know if you knew this, but the formula companies even design the layout of the NICU floor, and they make sure the
Mm,
mothers are staying super far away from where their babies are staying in the NICU, so that in order to actually like get up and feed your baby, you
yeah.
have to like traverse all of these hallways and stairs. It's they don't make it conducive to breastfeeding whatsoever. And the
No, they
formula
told me I probably
companies,
wouldn't be able to.
right, they're
They said
already,
it is highly unlikely that you are going to be able to breastfeed. And I said, no, that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm sure it will be difficult for her to learn. Like she was born before she learned how to suck. She couldn't do that yet. I was not expecting her to breastfeed on day 3. We didn't even get to hold her until a week and a half of her being born. And she was so little and there were so many wires. She was one
how
pound, 9 ounces.
yeah, I didn't ask how much she weighed. 1 pound 9 ounces.
And she
Wow.
was 13 inches long, which they thought she was rather tall. She was a tall, she
Yeah,
was a
those
tall
seem
baby.
that seems tall for that gestation.
Yeah,
So
my
you
husband's
didn't
very tall.
so you didn't get to hold her for a week and a half, but you were able to like see her and be with her. Like, so many things are different, which is I
Mm,
think so important to share your story, because I think women in this situation who have preemies or babies with, rare medical conditions probably feel so alone.
yeah,
And I'm sure it's a very tight knit community among NICU moms.
it is. But if you haven't actually experienced it, there's just a certain aspect of it that you don't get, that seeing your baby that little, and we took pictures of her like next to this like stuffed animal as she grew. And so you can
Mm,
see certain things like
yeah,
her
how big
diapers
they
were
really are.
about the size of an AirPod case when she was first born. And so certain visualizations like that help people understand, but there's something so different about actually being there. My friends were asking so many good questions and asking, do you want to talk about it? Do you not want to talk about it? What can we do to support you? Our community is amazing, but you just get so close with the nurses that that was one of the things that was most important for us, and that I think was such a gift from the Lord. So many of our nurses were believers. So this is probably a profession that I don't understand how some of them weren't. Like, you are witnessing miracles day in and day out. And
Yeah.
granted, yes, you do see a lot of tragedy, but to be able to see the things that they do and see what usually should be happening inside our bodies is insane. Like, seeing the development that typically is happening on the inside of our womb outside was mind blowing. And some of these nurses have been there for years. One of the primary nurses that Abby had has been doing this for 35 years. And she said when she first started, most babies that were born before 34 weeks didn't survive. Now,
Wow.
babies born at 34 weeks don't even always go to the NICU just because of how much things have progressed.
Just
Solid
to give
team.
like a little context for this, the early, like the youngest baby to have ever survived, I believe, and I could be wrong, but was somewhere around 21 weeks.
Yeah.
Like currently, like modern day, like that's the
Yeah.
youngest they've been able to save a baby is about 21 weeks where they're even viable. And that's very rare that they'll survive at that age. So you weren't very far from that period. And the fact that she came out kicking and screaming and didn't need to be intubated. And and I remember there was a testimony that you shared because I was posting updates and having people pray. And we were like, tell us what's
We're
going
rallying the
on.
troops.
We were rallying the troops. Like we were praying before she was delivered. We were praying you'd stay
Yeah.
pregnant and that she'd be okay. And so, we didn't know what was going to happen. But I just knew like if we were praying all over the world and we had hundreds and hundreds of people praying,
How many?
and I would show where they're all praying from and they were all praying.
Yeah.
And then she was born and you told us she came out like she was breathing, she was crying,
Mhm.
and we were like, oh my gosh, praise God. And then like at one point you said that she doesn't even need oxygen, which is like unheard of in the
Yeah, a
NICU
lot
at
of
that
babies will
age.
leave the hospital even with oxygen coming home.
Yeah.
And she was rocking it. She had this little onesie, said rocking the NICU like a boss, because she was doing so well. It was mind blowing. And I know that that is only sustained by the Lord. And
Mm.
we got to share with so many of those nurses about her story, about our faith, and not all of them were believers, but some of them were. So knowing that they were women there praying over her and loving her when I couldn't be there was both hard and refreshing at the same time, because I'm not there every day. I'm not able to do all these things for her. I'm not holding her all day long. I'm not nursing her yet. There are very few things that are mom things that I can do for her. But I'm just so grateful for the nurses that we had, because they did such a good job of not crossing that line of being her mom, but loving her so well and making sure that Abby felt safe.
Hmm.
And that's just so special. And I think that's something that God definitely gifted us with, because she was an hour away. I mean, that's, you can't be there. And again, with COVID, the rules were changing all the time. You left the hospital, you couldn't come back until the next day. So we couldn't split our time. And because Emily and Thomas were so traumatized about me leaving so abruptly and being gone, I was going down to
Yeah.
the hospital after they went to bed. I would leave my house around 8:30 or 9, drive the hour to the hospital, stay there until like 1 in the morning, and then come back home.
Mm. And then
So
you're momming all day long.
yeah, like you were saying about the skin to skin, and the nurses talked about that with us. One of her nurses was a travel nurse and had done a stint in Atlanta. And she said that statistics there were a lot lower in the health that they saw in the babies, because they didn't have a lot of parents coming into the NICU and spending time with the babies. And they consistently saw the ones that weren't being held once they could be held, they didn't do as well as the
Yeah.
babies that were being held and were having that parental connection.
Yeah. There's huge studies on the benefits of skin to skin, and I think for preemies, it's just as, I think it's even more important. And
I think
unfortunately,
so
they make
too.
it so difficult because, like, I have friends that are NICU nurses, and to your point, NICU nurses are a special breed of humans. Like, I have
Absolutely.
so much respect for these nurses because what they have to deal with and witness and support is just, I couldn't do it. Like, there's so many tubes and cords, and if you
Yeah.
jostle them at all, like, it's such an intense amount of staff, like, training, and like, you need so much staff support even just to be able to hold a NICU baby
Yeah.
that's on, like, all those different kinds of support and monitors in order to transfer them safely to a mother's chest. It takes a lot of work, but
Yeah.
every time they do, they see these babies' heart tone stabilize, blood pressure
Yeah.
stabilize, every single physiological thing you could measure in their body instantly goes to health. And
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, it's worth it. I
Oh,
know it takes a lot
absolutely.
of staff time, and it's not convenient, and there's
Yeah.
even risk to it because what if a tube falls out and they can't breathe or
Right.
whatever? But like, holy cow, is worth it. And I remember you posted a picture of the first
Yeah.
time you held Abby.
Yeah.
I'm gonna like
Oh,
cry even just talking about it. Like, you were crying, and I was just like,
oh
oh,
yeah.
it's what we
I
were
was so
praying
scared
for.
because I was like shaking. So I was so excited, but she was so little that I was like, I don't want to hurt her because she's
Yeah,
so small and moving her. And it's just crazy to see. Like I did not have that confidence when we were first there,
oh
but
sure, yeah.
they worked with us so much and were so helpful. And I remember the first time we got to give her a bottle was so special. And the video, she looked so tiny because Dylan got to do it.
Were you able to breastfeed her, or were you pumping? I mean, obviously she couldn't breastfeed in the beginning. Were you able to later, or
Yeah, so I was pumping and I had an insanely large milk supply, which was a huge blessing. And I had never pumped before because I've been lucky enough to be able to stay home with all of our other babies, and I had never used a pump before. And shout out to pumping moms because those are the worst.
yeah,
Super uncomfortable.
I'm not a pumping. I hate pumping. The pumping
Horrible.
moms, the working pumping moms, you are a champ.
Yeah,
So what at what point were you able to breastfeed?
she was 34 weeks, I believe, when we were able to first try because they actually don't want you to try. I might be off on that age, but they don't want you to try before then because even if they are successful, they burn too many calories
Hmm.
because it's so much effort for them at that point that they still want you to expose them to it. And you can even like squeeze a little bit out like onto their lips so they get used to the taste. But it burns so many calories that that was just something you kind of had to be aware of in time how long they were feeding from the breast versus from the feeding tube or from a bottle.
Okay, so she was actually only like 8 weeks old,
Yeah,
but 34 weeks, if you're talking about her full gestation, like, she
yeah,
wasn't even full term yet, and then
no,
she started. That's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah. So that was really, really exciting. And we just kind of would let her. And some days she wouldn't, some days she would, but I never wanted to push it. I just obviously she was capable. And I think it's something that naturally all babies desire. So we just always offered it. And then slowly as time went on, then I think it was 2.5 weeks after that, she just took to it. But it was so
Mm,
hard at the end of her stay because there are certain requirements they have to hit before they go home. And one of
yeah.
them is that all their feeds have to be from a bottle, which is really frustrating because they have like a certain time to do it in.
Yeah, some of
So
those requirements feel very archaic, and it can
yeah.
set back. Like, it can be
Hmm.
very frustrating and stressful as parents, from what I've heard, that they're so
Yeah.
close, like, they're gonna get released, and then something is off. They don't meet some milestone and some, like, policy that the hospital has,
Mhm.
so they gotta stay another 2 weeks, and it's like, ah, oh,
No, some
like,
of them
so
I totally
heartbreaking.
understand. Like
Yeah,
if they have like a bradycardia event, they
yeah,
have to not have those for like five
right.
days.
They certainly
That makes
don't,
sense.
yeah,
I don't
yeah,
want that to happen at home. That's terrifying.
yeah.
The feeds were the part that was the most frustrating because when I was there, I was like, well, I want to breastfeed her. But if I do that, that doesn't count as a bottle feed. And then that sets us back another day in her coming home. So
Oh, yeah,
that
it's
part was a
not
little
right.
stressful,
Another
but
example of how it's not designed at all to support breastfeeding.
yeah,
And most,
I thought, why don't you just have me stay here for 24 hours and see if she nurses on me for 24 hours? But they didn't
yeah,
approve that idea. So
Well, I love the fact that you advocated for it, because until we have more
Okay.
moms like you advocating for those kinds of things, that it's never going to change. But we
It
need to
was
be.
such a wonderful moment at towards the end of her stay. They have to do all their evaluations and stuff. And I told the nutritionist, I said, I'm not bringing home a fortifier. If you bring me a fortifier and you tell me to mix it with her breast milk and give it to her, I'm just not going to do it. So don't waste your time in giving it to me. Give it to somebody that actually is going to use it or needs it. So they did take her off it the last couple of days. We did kind of the same thing we did with the vitamins, where I said, if she starts losing weight, that's fine. I'm wrong. We'll put her back on it. Let's just see what happens. So then they do all their final assessments and they were like, well, I can't believe it, but you were correct. She can go home on just breast milk. That's fine. And I was like,
Amazing.
have we not learned, guys?
Maybe trust a mother's intuition. I mean, just the fact that she went home on breast milk alone is probably such a minority for NICU babies.
Yeah, that's what they said.
Yeah, like probably unheard of.
Yeah, it's, yeah,
So you probably broke
very rare.
so many records, like just how God intervened
Yeah.
and provided, and like how he would turn things around. I just remember hearing like story after story of like the breakthroughs that were happening with your baby, and how the doctors and the nurses were shocked, and like
Yeah.
that this just doesn't normally happen. But I think it's such a beautiful testimony of how God is walking with you, walking with
Yes.
moms during like one of the most difficult seasons of your life, I'm sure, and sustaining you, sustaining your husband. He's there with your kids when they're home alone and you're not able to be with them, and he was there with
Hmm.
your baby even through the other nurses taking care of
Yeah.
her.
And that was one of the most incredible things I think about her being named Abigail. Is we didn't look into the meaning of her name until we were in the NICU, and one of her nurses said, did you name her after she was born? And we said, no, we've known her name since even before we knew she was a girl. We knew that we were going to name her Abigail. And
Wow.
Abigail means my father's joy. And to see how much her life
Hmm.
has been such a testimony of God's goodness and his power and his grace, that I know that that just brings him so much joy to see one of his creations already bringing so much light in her little life. Like, she's a fighter. I mean, even in her first just 3 months of life, she went through more than I think I've gone through in my 30 years of life at this point. And for her life and her testimony to be able to show so much of who he is, that brings both a joy to her earthly father, my husband, to be able to know that I'm so proud of my daughter. And then also for the Lord to see what this creation has done and to be able to share with so many people about him and his power and everything that he does for us. It just feels so meant to be that her name is Abigail.
Hmm. That's beautiful. And I love, you post pictures now of her first and her second birthday. She is 2.5 now, which
Yes.
is crazy. Would you ever know looking at her like, oh, she was born at
No.
25 weeks?
They're like, I can't believe she is thriving as much. She does not seem like a preemie. She's very small. She looked like a very young baby for a very long time, but she was crawling around. She was grabbing at things. She was making great eye contact, making sense of noises, nursing like a champ. So after that first year, said she doesn't need to come back anymore, which is pretty rare that they usually do have to continue some kind of occupational therapy, some kind
Yeah.
of feeding therapy, but she is just thriving and
Wow.
sassy and crazy and so funny.
Yes, it sounds like she's a force to be reckoned with. So, Abigail is thriving. She's a little spitfire, and
Oh
you
yeah.
you get to share your testimony. And I love how God just used this and used it for your family, but also like that he provided for you every step of the way, and
Absolutely.
like intervened in incredible ways, and even broke like the typical status quo of like what all the doctors probably declared over your
Mhm.
baby, even from the time you were in labor preterm with
Yeah.
her. Oh, this is going to happen, she's going to be gray, and to like probably throughout your whole NICU stay, and even after, like, oh well, she's going to have delays and she's going to
Yep.
struggle with this and that, and then to not have you see that, and
Yeah.
probably in many ways because you followed your intuition and advocated for her when you knew what was best for
Yeah.
her. And I just
Mhm.
want to encourage moms listening to this, if you're in this situation, if you're struggling in the NICU or with a child with scary diagnoses or high risk
Mhm.
pregnancy, just know like you can speak up and you can
Yeah.
trust your intuition. And what would you share with anyone going through a situation like this, where they either know they're going to have a NICU baby due to some
Mhm.
diagnosis, or they're in the NICU now with their child?
I'd say the biggest thing that is going to carry you through that season is relying on the Lord day in and day out. We know that scripture tells us that each day has enough worry of its own, and that is a lesson that you will have concreted in your heart after a time in the NICU or any kind of scary diagnosis like that, that you really can only take it day by day. And I'm going to rely on the Lord through all of it because it is a marathon, it's not a sprint. And to be able to get through that, you have to rely on the Lord because we simply just don't have that capacity. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having those big breakdowns. There's nothing wrong with those days of hopelessness because there are some days where you're just going to feel like this is the worst. This is the absolute pit. And I don't know why I have to go through this. But to be able to, in those moments, give that over to the Lord, even if that means you still don't feel great the rest of the day, just relying on him and giving all of that to him, that's what's going to get you through it because there will be a day where you get to share your story with somebody who's gone through something similar or is going through something similar, and you're going to be able to bring them hope through it as well.
Yeah.
Or even your own child. I think about for Abby, I hope she never goes through a time in her life where she questions how important and valuable she is or doesn't know how loved she is. But we'll be able to share this story with her of look at how much the Lord loves you and has loved you since before you were even out of my womb.
Yeah. And to be able to tell her this story too as she grows up, like what a
Yeah.
blessing. Well, thank you
Yeah.
for sharing your story to our community and to everyone listening here. Ladies, if you want to follow Joan's tribe, is Rachel's Instagram, and that's Jones_tribe. Make sure you give her a follow and let her know that you listened. And if something inspired you, we would both love to hear it. You are just such an amazing inspiration to so many women. And I just want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to share with us and to be a witness for Jesus and to share his goodness and his testimony. It's just truly a beautiful thing. So thank you for sharing it with us.
Thank you for having me and thank you for everything you do for us community of moms. It's the content you put out is amazing and I'm just so grateful and please don't ever stop.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Pain-Free Birth Podcast. If you were encouraged, it would mean so much if you left us a 5-star review and shared this with your community. I'd love to connect with you on Instagram at Pain-Free Birth. And to learn more about the Pain-Free Birth e-course, free resources, private coaching, and upcoming events, find out more at painfreebirth.com. See you next week.